Welcome to Unique Device Identification Webinar 17. Today, Gary Pascoe and Bruce Thompson will provide an Australian UDI update, a workshop summary, and Australian UDI pre-production demonstration. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I would like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Now we'll hear from Gary Pascoe, the UDI Project Manager.
I will give you a bit of an update. It has actually been 4 months I looked at since we had our last UDI webinar, and in between that time there's been a lot of activity, some quite substantial engagement with sponsors in particular around the proposed policy direction for the Australian UDI, and I'd like to give you all an update on where that's at. Talk to you specifically around what came out of some face-to-face workshops and what we found and the participation through face-to-face workshops that we held in Sydney and Melbourne over the June period. As I mentioned, Bruce will then also give you a demonstration of the AusUDID pre-production environment, and certainly for those who are interested sponsors, we really welcome your registration or your interest in using that environment and your feedback on how that environment may be refined and changed to sort of suit how you're operating. And then at the end of the session, just to build on what Nishi said earlier, we'll like to sort of work through, depending on sort of time, we'll see what questions we have able to cover, essentially walk through the questions and answers that you may have asked through the Slido app through the course of the session. So we're looking to aim for about 15 minutes or so to be able to cover questions and answers from our time frame. So the Slido app will be opened up sort of partway through the session, so feel free to raise those questions as we're going and as things come to mind once it's open. But as to reinforce what Nishi said, we'll use that question and answer session to specifically address those questions. And if there's any questions that we haven't been able to answer, I think we'll definitely be providing response to all participants here, as well as other stakeholders we generally engage with, to ensure that we've got sort of common understanding of the responses to the questions, but also ensuring there's consistency across the group. So our UDI support team will manage those questions and answers and sort of send them out and distribute to those who have participated in the webinar, as well as if you're registered for our sort of updates. So as I mentioned, we have had a busy number of months, and certainly since I last spoke to you on our UDI webinar, it's about 4 months ago, and which is at the point where we acknowledged, or we sort of gave notice that the voluntary compliance date, which we were sort of aiming at to do sort of midpoint of this year, due to a sort of a range of challenges with the regulatory drafting, as well as finalisation of some of the policy intent, is being moved to the sort of the back end of 2023, which is essentially our sort of target was in the last quarter of 2023. Since that time, there's been a number of things that have happened, and we've had some fantastic engagement with a whole range of sponsors. We've actually had some feedback on some of the work we're doing, and certainly it's confirmed that we're looking to be on track for our voluntary compliance to commence from December 2023, and with that would then have the UDI regulations take effect. Now, all that will be subject to sort of finalisation and commitment and approval by the government in terms of their recommendations and so essentially that's sort of really where the key challenges are for us now, to be able to ensure that the government's briefed and is aware of what the options are for UDI implementation, and then provide their sort of their guidance on how they would like that implemented. In that meantime, and I'll talk a bit more about that sort of schedule and time frame. Since then, however, we've actually had a number of things sort of happening, and certainly the slide in front of you, we can sort of show there's probably 4 major activities that have commenced. So as I mentioned, we have released the Australian UDI pre-production environment, which we released in April, sort of the back end of April, early May. So since the last webinar, that has been made available, and we've had a number of sponsors register to use it and provide feedback since it's been opened up. We would actually encourage and be very welcoming of any sponsor who is interested in having access to the pre-production environment, and then providing us with feedback on terms of the usability or any other considerations that may be delivered through the pre-production environment. And Bruce, we have a dedicated separate session with Bruce to be able to talk through and demonstrate some of that with you later on today. So that environment is very much, as we talked about, is a pre-production. It is really looking to mirror the production environment. So that will be progressively incremented changes. It will actually, as feedback comes through, we are progressively making updates to that, the sort of technical solution. And so as sponsors, we would like to see you sort of coming back and reusing it, providing feedback so that we can, make sure updates are occurring, but also ensuring that that you have a most current and active environment that you can actually test and look through the UDI database. So that's been made available to sponsors. As part of that sort of pre-production environment, we've actually been extending and refining both the online side of the pre-production environment, which Bruce will talk you through today, but we're also adding to and ensuring that the consistency around some of the data elements and the interfaces with the National Product Catalogue and the machine-to-machine interface are actually also being updated to reflect both some finalizations with the data elements, but also ensuring that some of the extended features that came out of our sandpit testing have been incorporated into the National Product Catalogue and the machine-to-machine interface. So we're in the process of finalising that now. We are expecting to have, working with GS1 to have that National Product Catalogue interface and the data exchange with the MPC in place by the end of July, and essentially working to be able to have sponsors who use the National Product Catalogue to send data, or who would like to use the National Product Catalogue to send data into the UDI database, that you can start to do some of that testing. In addition, the machine-to-machine technical work has been completed. As really the sort of current process or the current step that we have at the moment. We have, because the machine-to-machine interface is using an international standard HL7 SPL, which is consistent with what's being used in the US FDA. We actually are getting international certification and review of that specification that we've developed at the moment, and that's sort of currently in the process. Once that's sort of finalised, and which we're hoping to be in the next couple of weeks, we're looking to have that published and then have sponsors available to testing that interface as well, if you choose to use the machine-to-machine interface. So that's sort of progressing really nicely, and certainly in a point where certainly through the August period, we're expecting to be able to have a version of the Net Data Dictionary published and available, but also then for sponsors to trial and test either the MPC and or the machine-to-machine interface as part of their interactions with the Australian UDI database. In addition to sort of the technical work, we've actually made a number of changes and refinements and refreshing of the UDI hub on the TGA website. We have ensured that since the last webinar that all the responses to the third consultation paper, which sort of closed at the end of last year, are up for you to sort of see and visibility, as well as providing a summary. We're also looking we've refreshed elements of the UDI hub and the TGA website around UDI, and we're in the process now of establishing a sort of constant refresh regime to ensure that we're keeping the information, and particularly adding frequently asked questions and ensuring that a lot of the questions you're asking now is available through the TGA website, so that it makes it easier for you to access information. So that's there's been a number of changes that have occurred, and certainly we intend to see more changes over the coming months to ensure that there's a sort of current update. And finally, we hosted, certainly in June, 2 face-to-face workshops, one in Sydney on the 9th of June and one in Melbourne on the 16th of June, with a number of sponsors. And we deliberately focused on sponsors as part of that conversation, because we're looking to get sponsor feedback on a number of things around the policy intentions and what we're looking around to unintended consequences for those workshops. We had nearly 300 sponsors participating, and essentially we had I think it was a very valuable session that was sort of covered with sponsors, and it provided a lot of valuable feedback around the UDI implementation, the policy intent, unintended consequences, and I'll talk through that a little more as part of this sort of session. So as I mentioned, there's really this point since our last webinar, we've got a lot of activity. It's starting to bring together both sort of technical aspects of the UDI database and its implementation, as well as finalising some of the policy and sort of intended implementation considerations for the UDI. And over the coming months, we'll start to see that come together and ensure that any policy changes are reflected in the UDI database and vice versa. With the other final thing I just wanted to sort of stress, and where we have to give guidance to sponsors, in particular manufacturers, while we're still finalising the formal arrangements for the issuing of UDI device identifiers within Australia, I really wanted to highlight for sponsors that if you don't have device identifiers allocated to your devices, then we are looking to establish the formalised arrangements with the 3 issuing agencies that are used globally. So certainly in the US FDA and the European Commission, in terms of being able to use those issuing agencies for Australian UDI device identifiers. So as we're formalising that arrangement, we will be sort of documenting more and putting that onto the TGA website. But we would like to sort of highlight now and use this time to highlight to sponsors and manufacturers that we will be looking to encourage and support the use of device identifiers where applicable from Europe or US FDA, using the labelling that is used in the US FDA and Australia, provided they sort of still fit within the Australian regulatory sort of environment, and the device identifiers on those labels issued by GS1, HIPC or ICC BBA will be accepted within the Australian UDI environment. As I mentioned, the formal arrangements are still being finalised with the issuing agencies, but we've had really good conversation with them over the last month and a bit to sort of get the arrangements in place. And if a sponsor or manufacturer is interested in understanding what the implications of or what the requirements are for them to be allocating a UDI device identifier, we would actually, the issuing agencies are actually ready for your calls and be happy to take your queries in terms of how that would be dealt with in an Australian context. So certainly, if there's any questions you would like to raise around the issuing agencies and what we're doing, feel free to continue to raise them through to the UDI help desk, but also then feel free to sort of contact or be in touch with any of those 3 issuing agencies that you that see on the screen in front of you, and they're very keen to sort of start helping guide you through that process. And over the coming months, we'll formalise through the TGA sort of process and TGA website what those notifications are. But you can go forward with confidence that those 3 the 3 issuing agencies that will start to will form the foundation of Australian UDI implementation. So just sort of the headlines and the highlights. So the next step is I want to just give you a bit more specifics, because there are a number of questions and topics that came from our face-to-face workshops. So I wanted to talk you through those, and it's really where the focus of our regulatory considerations are now. And so to be able to sort of talk through what's likely to be happening in that space. As I mentioned, we hosted the 2 face-to-face workshops in Sydney and Melbourne. We had really great interaction and engagement from sponsors, and the whole aim of those workshops is really to ensure the understanding of the Australian policy position on the UDI implementation. So that one of the things that we were finding, we had a great representation from small, medium and large manufacturers and sponsors to be able to sort of understand and talk through the implications of the Australian UDI and ensure there's consistency of understanding from the sponsor community around the implications of UDI. And we certainly had great interaction with sponsors around what that would mean and particular device types. We also used the workshops to discuss any challenges, any implications and or unintended consequences of the UDI implementation, with the lens of really looking at it from the industry, so medical device industry, and be able to ensure that from a sponsor and manufacturer perspective that we understood if there was any unintended consequences or if there are other implementation considerations, but also from the TGA's perspective as well as then consumers. So it was we looked at the challenges of implementing UDI from all those angles, and we had some great feedback and some further actions that came out of that as part of that conversation. And then finally was to inform the regulatory guidance documents before final drafting. Through the workshops, we had a lot of common themes across Sydney and Melbourne, but we also had a lot of different themes depending on the different sponsors that were participating, and had great representation on a number of issues or a number of device types and questions that sponsors were asking around how UDI may apply to their particular circumstances, and really helping inform us around what we need to include in the guidance documents, as well as providing specific examples around types of examples we would put into the guidance document to ensure that we could bring it to life and ensure that UDI understanding is shared with across the industry. So as I mentioned, we had nearly 300 sponsors. They sort of participated. We very much deliberately focused it on sponsors because at this stage we're talking through, as I mentioned, the consequences of implementation of UDI and that sort of medical device sponsors and manufacturers, and you use that session to sort of talk through that. In future periods, we're looking to start to put more information out and sort of share information for healthcare providers, other consumers, any other healthcare organisations, other stakeholders within the healthcare system around what UDI is and what that means and the implications for that. I really wanted to get that foundation focused on sponsors in the beginning. So we felt that it was a really valuable session, and it certainly was useful from the TGA side of it. And out of that workshop, we did take away a number of action items, and there was certainly work that we had to perform, and there's work that's now underway within the TGA team to actually look at some number of considerations. So we've grouped those considerations into sort of really the 6 groups that we see in front of you. And I won't talk through all of them, but it is something that I really want to sort of highlight that there is still some work, and there's some work that's really currently underway for us to sort of refine and make some refinements around the policy intent, and then use that to sort of inform the government around considerations that they are taking for the UDI implementation. So the first one is a highlights was implementation options. We had lengthy conversation and had great working sessions both in Sydney and Melbourne with sponsors around the impact of the European MDR and the timing of that associated with the timing of UDI here in Australia. And really sort of looked at a number of options around how that could be dealt with, and certainly the concerns from sponsors around the likely load and burden on them in relation to sort of meeting compliance for European MDR, ensuring that the data is coming from Europe or from manufacturers based in Europe and supplying European devices was valid and accurate and could be supplied to the TGA, as well as then other implications. Out of that session, we actually had taken away to do some work around consideration and implementation options, and we're currently sort of working through that internally within the TGA. And those options considered simplifying the process to be able to ensure that sponsors could meet some of the requirements for UDI, but because there was an amount of change that was going on across Europe, to ensure that that was less burdensome on them. So things like the trigger fields and simplification around trigger fields, looking at what's mandatory and what's not mandatory within the UDI database, and maybe over time actually starting with a simple sort of set of data fields that are mandatory, and then over time extending it out to meet some of the other Australian requirements. In that process, we also looked at the consent to supply. I know we have some questions as part of the pre-registration process around understanding the consent to supply and what that would mean, and some great suggestions that the TGA is now considering around how we can streamline and potentially one of the options around simplifying the consent to supply and using a notification period to ensure that we don't create additional burden for TGA and sponsors around how we deal with devices that may not have all the data or may not be able to meet all the requirements that are there. And then also looking at, we had some feedback around proposed implementation dates for in vitro diagnostic devices. And as part of that work that we're doing now is to look at the timing and possible considerations for how we split up the implementation periods and dates for in vitro diagnostic devices. So that's sort of work that's really sort of working through at the moment, and we'll sort of continue to work through within the TGA and then consult out with various groups as we're going. The other things that we were looking into, we had some feedback around the understanding of how the implications and the impact of surgical loan kits and device identification for loan kits, as well as system and procedure packs, and what that would mean within a healthcare and hospital setting. And we're looking to commence that work to sort of understand what those implications are, what that would mean for healthcare, and also then the UDI requirements for retail products we had some good discussion around that, and then certainly the TGA took away some work to be able to understand and provide clearer guidance around the implications of UDI for retail products, and then whether there's considerations for labelling from other countries, and particularly Japan. And so certainly our going in position was to support the European and US compliant labels, and certainly one of the requests was, could we extend that to other countries? So the team is looking at that. In addition to that, we had some feedback around the Australian UDI database and how that would operate, in particular around the management of corrections, the global medical device nomenclatures, and the use of multiple sponsors for the same medical device. So there's some work that we're doing and continuing to work within the UDI database and how that's been implemented, and that will continue. And we've already started to see through some of our engagements, and those of you who participated in our technical working group last week, we started to share and present some information about the options, for example, around how to deal with corrections, or how we're thinking about managing corrections and changes during grace periods. So that will continue. TGA integration, which is, as I mentioned, there's some implications for consent to supply. So looking at how UDI may impact that process, but also some of the other TGA processes, such as recourse adverse events and the single audit program, MDSAP. And finally, sort of the two final components that really sort of came out of the workshops were really about information definitions, examples of guidance documents that we can start to develop, and taking that information to ensure that there's a nice, concise and clear sets of document to support you, and likely avoid a number of those questions that you may be asking around, you know, what does EDI mean in certain circumstances, but also ensure that what support arrangements we have in place, building on the support team we have, to be able to ensure that there's user guides and other support products that can help inform you about the UDI implementation. And so out of all of that workshop, there's still a lot of work to do. The team is well progressed on progressing through that and working through it. But the workshops are really valuable, and particularly helping us. The items I'm talking about on the left-hand side, and so blue, is really where our sort of key considerations are. And what we're proposing to do, and what we're working on now, is really the timeline that we're looking to sort of get that in place. So between now and certainly started in June now and then the end of August, we're sort of finalising and doing some further consultation around understanding those implications, talking through with sponsors as well as other stakeholders around the implications of those impacts and considerations, as using that to then inform some of the sort of position for government, to help inform government and make them to allow them to make their decisions and provide their guidance to us around the final UDI implementation. From September through to November, really using that time to finalise the drafting, ensure that the drafting instructions and the information that goes to the regulations. So we'll have the UDI amendments to the essential principles, and then the other supporting regulatory instruments, to ensure that we have the UDI sort of rolled through that and it's clear and concise. So that will happen through September and November, again with the sort of aim of having about December 2023 have the regulations in effect. And from that point in time, we'll have our voluntary compliance version of the UDI database available at the same time. So that's sort of really where we're looking forward. So we've now broken that work into a number of stages, and the team is well progressed in sort of progressing through each of those questions and all the topics. We have started, we do talk to a number of different industry stakeholders, and some of you will see some of that, some of those questions and some of that consultation come up over the coming next few weeks. So thank you. I just sort of wanted to pause there and thank you for, if there are any questions, please feel free to raise them, add them to the Slido. And I would like to then hand over to Bruce, who can talk you through the AusUDI pre-production environment and provide examples and illustration of how the UDI system works. Thanks, Bruce, over to you.
Thanks very much, Gary. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to be giving an overview of the main features of our online AusUDID pre-production environment. The environment can be used to preview the features that are going to be made available prior to production, as well as being used to establish that any machine-to-machine interface that you may create can appropriately make requests and receive responses from AusUDID prior to you being able to register for production access. Now, I realise that not all of you will necessarily use the online portal to add UDI records, but you can certainly use it to view records and also to be able to see what the public will be able to see. What I'm going to demonstrate via the online portal is two main things: how to manage your UDI records, including how to link an ARTG to an existing device, and also to show you what public access is available once the production system becomes available. The login procedure, firstly, for the pre-production environment is similar to our production system with one key difference, and that is the pre-production login will take you straight to AusUDID rather than first logging into the TGA business services. When you first indicate your interest in participating in pre-production, you'll be given a login link. The login starts with this page where you'll select Login with TGA. You will log in using your TGA user ID and password, and this user access will have been set up by whomever has the administrator role for your organization. Once you log in, you'll be taken straight to AusUDID. In this particular example, the organization that I'm using is both an agent and a sponsor in their own right, and I select the organization that I'm dealing with in this online session. And once confirming the organization, I'm taken to the homepage of our pre-production system. Next feature is the My UDI Records. It is a feature that allows you to view all the medical devices for which you are the sponsor. The results can be filtered by keywords. So I'll just pause that for a moment. The results can be filtered by keywords such as brand or model or version, GMDN term name, or even the ARTG number. Selecting the primary link, primary DI link, will open up the medical device information such as this page here. And the information is split into various sections. We have an overview that shows things like the ARTG number that the device is included under, and then variously sections for device identifiers that indicates all of the other device identifiers associated with this device, general device information such as brand, catalog number, device class, the clinical characteristics, whether it's for single use, etc., the manufacturer details, the ARTG that it's included under, the global medical device nomenclature that's been selected for this device, any packaging that has been set up for the device. In this instance, I haven't set anything else up. The production information, such as whether there's a lot or batch number on the label, any supporting documents for the device. If you use the online portal to add a medical device, you would use this particular option, Add UDI Record. This opens up the medical device information screen where you can add relevant information. The information is added one section at a time. And as you go through adding the information, there are validations that are shown as you work through the section. In this case, I put in an incorrect check digit. Elements are shown as mandatory by indicating with the blue asterisk that you can see there. And checkboxes are shown for a number of our yes and no questions. So it's a matter of working through the section one section at a time. Elements are shown as mandatory, or errors are shown where the data is not valid. Drop-down lists are shown for important fields such as device class. We also have it on the MRI safety status. We also have a number of yes and no fields as well. On this particular screen, it also has provision for you to enter details such as device package to sterile and requires sterilization prior to use. One of the checks that we've put in place is that if you indicate, for example, that it requires sterilization prior to use, another element, it pops up asking you to select the particular sterilization methods. So I can choose the sterilization method that's applicable. If I uncheck the requires sterilization prior to use, then that sterilization box is removed. And I can also add the clinical sizes and storage methods, storage and handling method. On the associate a manufacturer screen, you would use the TBS organization number used to select the manufacturer. This is the same number that's used in the ARTG system. Moving on to ARTGs, the ARTG number is validated to ensure that the ARTG sponsor and manufacturer that you choose matches the UDI sponsor and manufacturer. So you're not able to add just any ARTG, it must match with sponsor and manufacturer for your device. For the GMDN terms, you can search by text or by code, and that will bring up a list of the matching GMDM terms for you to choose the one that's appropriate for this particular device. If your device is included in a higher level package, you can configure the package details on this page here. Each package requires its own device identifier. You can nominate the name or type of package, whether it's called a box, a bag, a case, or some other description that is relevant for you. You indicate the number of items that are in that particular package, and then you can create the package. This section here is to include the elements that make up the production identifier. There's a section I'll talk about later for supporting documents. And then lastly, you can save, once you've gone through all the sections, you can save the draft for later. You can publish it, and you can publish it either immediately or set it to a future date. Now, if I return to my UDI records, you can see that I've sorry, it skipped ahead. If you've gone back to my UDI records, you'll see that it will actually display the record that you've just created. I do want to show on this slide here that you're able to search for that when you search for devices, that you're not just restricted to just using the primary DI. If your packaged device is contained within, say, a box that has 5 items, then the box has its own package device identifier that I used in the previous example. You can use that identifier to retrieve the details of the medical device that's contained within that package. So if on this particular screen I've entered this number, which is the package device identifier, it's returned a device that on the surface does not seem to match on the primary device identifier. But that's because this device that I've entered is actually one of the packages within this device. So if I continue, if I select the device and then go to the packaging section, then the number that I searched for is shown on the screen there. So I'm able to search not just for primary device identifiers, but for package device identifiers as well. I can search for packages via a number of ways. I can use the devices menu as well as the search on the home menu. This is just another example of bringing up the same package. I won't stop that one now. The next feature that I'd like to show is how you as a sponsor can add an ARTG identifier to an existing medical device, regardless of who added the device. Now, an ARTG can only be added to a device that's already been published. So in this case, I would select the link ARTG details, and I can filter the results to display the devices that I'm interested in. It's as simple as selecting the Edit ARTG ID box and then entering the ARTG that is relevant for this particular device. Validation occurs to ensure that the sponsor and manufacturer of the ARTG matches the sponsor and manufacturer of the UDI record. If it doesn't match, you receive the error messages shown there. When I enter the valid ARTG, then I'm able to save that particular ARTG and have it linked to the record. You can see that both ARTGs are now shown. The same process can be used to remove, in certain circumstances, the ARTG, only if it should not have been added in the first place. So you can see that the ARTG is now gone. For the online portal, it is possible to save the medical device as a draft. Selecting the drafts option shows you the medical devices which are in draft so that you can finish editing them and publish them. The Continue Edit button will bring up the sections within the device, and you can complete all of the sections in a similar way that I'd shown when you first added the device. Saving the record, when you finish adding the sections, you can save the record either as draft, or you can publish the record, or you can delete the draft record. All of those options are available. We have a number of ways of adding supporting documents to a medical device. The online portal allows documents to be added as an attachment or as a URL. At this stage, our security restrictions limit us to accepting PDF documents only. For our other channels, such as the bulk spreadsheet upload, NPC or M2M channels, we only accept a URL link. We're not accepting attachments via these channels. Within the portal, we can add documents one device at a time, or the other way is to use our new bulk feature, which allows a document to be added to multiple devices at a time. And that's the purpose of the Manage Documents option and the screen that's shown. When the screen is first displayed, it will show all of your medical devices for which you have supplied an ARTG number. Now, since this is only shown to sponsors, it will only show the details for the logged in sponsor. The top half of the screen is where you can filter the medical devices to select the ones which you wish to add, replace, or delete documents. The filter by keyword allows you to select by manufacturer name, or brand, or model, or version, or GMDN. The middle part of the screen shows the action buttons that will be enabled once you've selected one or more devices to add a document to, or you can replace or delete specific documents. So this is an example of adding a document. The filters show that I am dealing with a patient information leaflet. I've requested to list all of my documents that do not currently have a patient information leaflet. In this case, there are two devices, and I've selected those devices. Selecting Add a new document to two devices will bring up this modal. The modal allows me to choose between a URL or an attachment. In this instance, I've chosen a URL link and have added the URL. If I had chosen attachment, I would be given a drag and drop screen to select a file to be uploaded. and selecting the Add Document from this screen will link the URL to the two devices that I selected on the previous screen. Within the online portal, it's possible to do a bulk upload of medical devices via an Excel spreadsheet. This could be used if you have up to 100 devices to add, and the devices can be included in the spreadsheet. We've provided a template which is available under the Bulk Edit UDI option. The template, which I've pre-filled in earlier, is divided into various tabs and includes all of the elements that are required. There is some pop-up help available for various columns and some basic validation, including drop-down lists, such as the device class. There are drop-downs for basic yes and no fields, and also others such as the MRI safety status. It's just a matter of completing the template for each of the relevant sections and then saving your template. Once the template has been completed and saved, the template can be dragged back into the bulk upload page. Once it's dragged back into that box, the file is validated and any errors are displayed. So that allows you to return to the spreadsheet, open up the file again and fix the errors. So again, dragging the file into the box will again validate the particular template, and where there are no errors, you can then select Upload UDI Records. In this instance, I had one record uploaded, which I can now see by selecting my UDI records. The last group of features that I want to show are ones available to the public. This could be consumers, hospitals, clinicians, anyone who doesn't log into AusUDID. One of these options is Find Supporting Documents. This will allow the public to use AusUDID to search for patient information leaflets for medical devices. Only medical devices for which a sponsor has uploaded a patient information leaflet will be displayed. And as before, the list can be filtered on various keywords. Once a medical device is selected, the supporting document section for the device is displayed. This will show the existing documents that have been associated with the device. Selecting the view against the view link against each one will either navigate to the URL link if one was provided, or it will download the attachment if it was provided. In this instance, since I've logged in as a sponsor for this device, I can see the Edit Device button, which will throw me into an edit mode and allow me to add, replace, or delete documents for this individual medical device. If I'm not the sponsor for the device, I can't edit the device, and as a member of the public, I would not see that edit device option. The last feature I want to show is that anyone can view and download devices from AusUDID. If I were to search for devices, in this case using the keyword cardiac, I would be shown matching devices. I'm able to select one or more of the devices and then choose to export those records. My choices are to export the full record or just to export the search results in various file formats. I can search via the home page, or I can search via the devices page. Keywords, as I've mentioned before, can include manufacturer name or could include part of the GMDN term name. There is also a rudimentary feature that allows your device camera to scan a barcode or enter it manually to retrieve the details of that medical device. Once found, in this case, that example it's not found, but once found, you can view the details for that device. Lastly, you may have a need to download all of the medical device details. Under the download options, there is the ability to download the full current version or previous version, as well as to download only the medical devices for which there's been a change in the last day, week, or month. This is provided so it can be integrated or compared to with your source systems. As you can see, that brings me to the end of this section. So I've shown you how you're able to, via the online portal, to add records one at a time, to add devices as a draft, and to retrieve and edit your changes and to publish them, to view your published records and make further changes, to add ARTG IDs to other existing devices, and to upload and manage patient information leaflets. Also, I've shown how the public is able to view all published devices, to export selected devices via a number of file formats, to download either the full database or the latest daily, weekly, or monthly changes, and also to find supporting documents. I really appreciate your attention. There was a lot that I went through there, which you'll be able to see later on in replay of the presentation. So thank you very much. I'll hand back to Gary.
Thanks, Bruce. Just sort of really wanted to wrap up the sort of work that Bruce has done, and I think there was a number of questions that were coming through as part of the chat as well as the Slido. We have the UDI@health.gov.au mailbox. That is our support team, and essentially any questions that have come through. So we encourage you to raise any other questions that may come up outside of the sort of these sessions that you think, well, how does that apply to my context or my situation? What does that mean? The support team responds to those questions and provides an answer in a really reasonable time. So feel free to sort of use that email address as we're going. So given that we have a number of questions sort of coming through, and we haven't got a lot of time, so I might unfortunately be a bit judicious with some of sort of the responses to sort of questions. So we had a couple that were asked in relation to how you get access to the pre-production version of the database. Please feel free to send an email to udi@health.gov.au to be able to access the pre-production. So it is available to sponsors at this point in time. We are limiting it to sponsors or their sort of representatives from manufacturers, really to be ensure that we have that version of the database right. So if you are sort of a consumer or somebody who is not a sponsor, then we are looking to introduce that access to pre-production, but that will be later in the year so that we can ensure that we've got the data in the database that is usable and accessible. So as I mentioned, udi@health.gov.au is send us an email and the team will very happily give you access. I'm going to sort of flick through. So there was a question around the voluntary compliance dates and what was being, when voluntary compliance might start, and essentially then what that would mean during the voluntary compliance period and then mandatory compliance from that point on. So as I mentioned, we're aiming for, again, subject to sort of the final government direction, really December of this year to have voluntary compliance take effect. From that point onwards, we're actually intention is to have 12 months before a voluntary compliance period for sponsors, if they choose to submit UDI data and to have devices that supplied with UDI labels coming in and being supplied to the TGA for any device class. So it's really a period of time for sponsors to start to provide the data, get themselves ready and familiar before it becomes mandatory from the mandatory compliance date. We are working through the considerations for mandatory compliance and when they would start. We're essentially looking at our approach is to have a progressive rollout of mandatory compliance by device risk class, with the high risk devices Class 3, Class 2B devices to take effect 12 months after voluntary compliance. So if we're looking to go forward from December 2023, then from December 2024 to have mandatory compliance for high risk, and then effectively a 12-month rollout period from them as we work through the other device classes. We are looking, and based on our feedback from the workshops, we are looking at the implications of those dates and what we may be able to do to support or ease some of the burden, in addition to, as I mentioned before, what those dates may apply for IVDs, because we have had some feedback around considerations for splitting up some of the IVD dates. So that's sort of working through, and we'll provide notification of that once that's sort of confirmed by government. Bruce, I have a question for you. From your experience so far, how long does it take to complete an entry in the UDI database?
What we've found is that because we've been using the system a lot and using mainly test data, you can actually go through through all of the screens fairly quickly. I think our testers have it down to about 2 minutes. More importantly, the question is, it is a straightforward process if you already have the information available. If you have to stop and go and search for further information, then yes, it will take you longer, but it's only in a matter of a number of minutes to enter the data.
Thanks, Bruce. Let's just say we've actually hit time, so I might just one final question sort of coming down from sort of come to me. The question was, will all manufacturers with medical devices be added to the drop-down list for manufacturers? And wanted to sort of say those who are actually manufacturers and sponsors who are using and registered within the TGA business services systems, and essentially those manufacturers who currently supply devices that have been authorized for supply here in Australia, that information will be in the TVS system. So we will draw that information from TVS. So by moving it into the health environment, and one of the challenges or changes that have occurred since we've gone to pre-production is to have that capability in place, so that we're able to sort of use the existing information, so that drop down would be populated with the manufacturers that currently supply devices to Australia. So look, I'm just see there's still a number of questions still coming through, so we might just sort of wrap up here. We've hit time, and wanted to say thank you for your time and for your contribution. Those questions that are still coming through, we will be responding to them, so we'll provide a response to those questions as we're finalising. The material from the webinar we'll be making available in the coming weeks. So we essentially take that information, publish it on the TGA website, and we'll provide you with notification once that webinar video and the transcript is available. So again, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate your contributions, and wishing you all a very nice day.